If you learn really fast, you probably wouldn't have to go to school at all. Now, when I was young, yeah, school was sort of okay, but I found quite often that school got in the way.
A long, long time ago, he said it was going to be, I don't know, $400 a share.
And this began when I was very, very young. When I was 11.
Basis was supposed to be, I think it's like $66 a share was what your call was. So he was wrong by a factor of 5.
Areas, and we've had incredible discoveries about learning that began with that first question. I went on from there to become passionate about psychology, and
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think a lot of people think I must spend a lot of time with media.
For the rest of my life up until this point. In 1981, I took my...
Spent on engineering and design. Engineering and design, so it's developing next generation product.
It was really, really difficult, and that a Westerner could study for 10 years or more and never really get very good at it. And I also went in with a different idea, which was taking all of the conclusions from...
I grew up in the Midwest in the United States. I grew up in Wisconsin. But I always had big dreams. I was always looking for ways to make money when I was sell Christmas cards, compete in that I actually became an entrepreneur is not so surprising. I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and between my junior and senior year, I actually said, I got to see the rest of the world, just not be here working away the whole time. And I wound up going to Europe, but I stopped in England. And I saw this poster for a lecture on geosynchronous orbiting satellites. And I thought, wow, that's cool. And I what 20-year-old woman thinking about it, I came out of that lecture and I thought, wow.
Rest of my life up until this point. In 1981, I took
the Berlin Wall, and we have the Great Wall of China to keep people out. And we didn't know that much about what was behind those walls. And I thought, wow, we could get behind those walls. We could really communicate with people. Wonder if they're just like us, really, or not. So I went on to write a master's thesis on satellite.
Learn faster. And this began when I was very, very young. When I was 11 years old, I wrote a letter to researchers in the Soviet Union asking about hypnopedia. This is sleep learning, where you get a tape
description. They called us pulp nonfiction, and I really like that. Because I do feel that while we will take some liberties with time, composites of certain characters, often to protect ourselves and some of the people involved in the story who might have a problem with how they're depicted.
Beside your bed, and it turns on in the middle of the night when you're sleeping. And
pretty conservative about the degree to which we will change the story.
Learn faster. And this began when I was very, very young. When I was 11 years old, I wrote a letter to researchers in the Soviet Union.
In terms of the way it uses graphics and the speed, and this is a machine that a lot of people are going to be able to afford. That's a very, very useful machine. I was enthused. Doesn't work with new hardware very often, but we put a team of people on it from the beginning, and we're planning that over half of our retail sales next year will come from Macintosh software.
Put it beside your bed, and it turns on in the middle of the night when you're sleeping, and you're supposed to be learning.
The process is pretty long and strenuous. One of the most popular ways of getting kicked out of the process is not passing the oral board. In the police process, typically you'll have an initial application that you have to fill out and turn in, and from that pool of people that turn those in, they select a certain amount of people to move on to the next step. From there is usually the physical, which is the push-ups, sit-ups, and a 1.5-mile run. If you pass that, you move on to a written exam. And from that written exam, I believe you have to get like a 70-75% to move on. From there, you move on to the oral board. And this is where a lot of people get kicked out.
This is a really, really important question in today's world. We have massive challenges with environment. We have massive challenges with...
Here in the audience happen to bring with them this afternoon a calculator. If you have one, perhaps on your phone or somewhere, and you're pretty comfortable using it, raise your hand. I'll need a couple of people to help me out here. I see 1, 2, and perhaps one more. Would the three of you bring out your calculators and join me up here on stage, and let's give these volunteers.
Westerner could study for 10 years or more and never really get very good at it. And I also went in with a different idea, which was,
my dad would calmly say to me, well, the fair is not in town. And that's how it worked in our relationship.
6 months I was fluent in Mandarin Chinese, and it took a little bit longer to get up to native.
With many organizations working remotely, it's even more important that those in the senior seats share knowledge. When people have a compliment or a complaint, it is based on their point of view. When you talk to someone, you need to consider.
And that a Westerner could study for 10 years or more and never really get very good at it. And I also went in with a different idea, which was
to do with beliefs rather than talent and ability. So I think when you say you can't draw, that's just an illusion. And today I'd like to prove that to you. Now when I say draw, I'm not saying we're all going to draw like Michelangelo. We're not going to be painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling. But would you be happy if, by the end of this session, you could draw?
And it turns on in the middle of the night when you're sleeping, and you're supposed to be learning from this. Good idea. And
well, actually, there's only two things you need to do to be able to achieve this. One is
began with that first question. I went on from there to become passionate about psychology, and I have been involved in psychology in many different ways for the rest of my life up until
and being popular. And when you go out into the real world, you realize that that moment is just high school, you know? Now I remember Kendra Agee, but everything else I don't remember. At that moment in your time in life, you feel like that's all that matters. High school, it's like, oh, this girl doesn't like me, this guy here, and it's all this drama, and you go into the real world and you know it's about just trying to make your mark in the world. And I never got a chance to do that academically. So I had this fire.
Years. Now, you need to understand that in 1981, everybody thought Chinese.
I've always been a big fan of France and Paris in particular, and wondered what it would be like to live here. And so that was sort of the germ of the idea of what it's like to be an expatriate.
What was really cool was that in 6 months.
And from the time I spent here, I thought there's an idea here for a show. In this particular case, it's a real fish out.
It took a little bit longer to get up to native.
Somewhere. And I did spend some time here in intelligent programming, and complicated. And I think it just creates so many opportunities for writers. For a show, in this particular case, it's a real fish out of water story about a girl who inadvertently takes this job out here for the luxury goods French marketing firm.